Dr. Thomas Jeffery Miley, lecturer of political sociology in University of Cambridge. Thank you very much for being with us today. I want to start by asking, you recently edited the book called Your Freedom and Mine, Abdullah Öcalan and Kurdish Question in Erdogan's Turkey. So can you briefly tell us about this book?
Yeah, the book grew out of my involvement in a series of delegations known as the International Imrali delegations, which were spearheaded by Judge Essa Musa originally.
You were part of the delegation?
I had been part of those delegations. Essa Musa, of course, had been Nelson Mandela's lawyer and had a long trajectory of involvement in the struggle for Kurdish freedom with the Kurdish freedom movement. The Imrali delegations took place just after the breakdown of the peace process, the last peace process in 2015, and they were an attempt to sort of exert pressure on the Turkish state and also on the European institutions to pressure the Turkish state to get back to the negotiation table and to put an end to the horrific violence that was engulfing the country after the breakdown of the peace negotiations. So the original idea behind the book was to document the experiences of different politicians, intellectuals, activists, trade union representatives who had been involved in these delegations. And it kind of grew out of that to give a broader historical contextualization and also to take seriously the reasons why different elements of international solidarity why we have put our so much effort and energy into the solidarity with the Kurdish freedom movement. So
one of your interview, you said democratic confederalism can be an alternative for peace and kind of self-determination, genuine self-determination in the region, in the Middle East. So what is your understanding or view about democratic confederalism?
Yeah, I think that the democratic and federal model does provide the only viable and desirable alternative to what is a catastrophic situation in the Middle East in particular, the so-called Middle East in particular, but also that's engulfing the globe. If we think about the capitalist modernity, the trajectory that the world is on is one of climate catastrophe, climate apocalypse, really. At the same time, there's this Orwellian war on terror, which is an unending war and still expanding war regime that literally puts the future of humanity at risk. So if we take both the climate catastrophe and the permanent wars that are generated by the system, we have an existential threat to the future of the planet.
And after Turkish invasion, international community and states, governments have been talking a lot about Kurds, but they only talk about part that they were a good ally or they were fighting against ISIS, but nobody really is talking about what we just talked about, like the democratic or the system, or that it can be a solution to all these crisis, chaos in the Middle East. Why it is not seen? Why people are not talking about that part of?
Well, I think with respect to the way that the mainstream media functions, the mainstream media is dominated by capitalist corporations that are very closely aligned with the governments and the vested interests that control the foreign policy establishments in the major NATO countries. And of course, these governments have no interest in solving the problems of capitalist modernity because they embody the collectively genocidal and suicidal set of forces that are determined to extract as much as possible and destroy the potential for life on the planet. So, insofar as these are the vested interests in the existing system, they don't have any interest in making it known to people that there is an alternative that people are struggling for and actually constructing on the ground at great costs and up against many very difficult odds, showing again and again a remarkable will to resist and a will to construct a viable and desirable alternative for humanity.
After Trump's withdrawal decision from 9 October, Turkey attacked and invaded some part of northern Syria, where we call Rojava as well. So in this case, when you look at U.S. foreign policy, what can you say about that?
Well, it's an interesting question. I think that the United States is in a situation of much instability with respect to the governing system in the United States, particularly the election of Donald Trump. In many respects, injects a high degree of just volatility in a decomposing system, let's say. So I think that going back to December of 2018, it was clear that Trump, it was Trump's inclination to let Turkey have its way with the north of Syria, but elements in the American foreign policy establishment, particularly the Central Command around the Pentagon, were very concerned about this because they understood that for geostrategic interests, that the tactical alliance with the Kurdish movement was in the interests of American empire, and so they were taken aback back in December of 2018 and managed to get Trump to reverse his decision, but he reiterated that decision and seemed to have caught many people off guard in the foreign policy establishment. At least those are the noises they were making. It's interesting to watch, for example, the reactions of people in the Senate House on Foreign Relations, the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations. If you see some of the testimonies when James Jeffries came in and watched the way that very conservative people were reacting with outrage, is an interesting sort of sense of the different sensibilities within where there be unanimity with respect to a kind of American imperialist outlook with respect to foreign policy. There are nonetheless many tactical and strategic disagreements that come to the fore.
So in all this chaos, it looks like U.S. or Trump has reversed his decision again, changed his decision, and saying by that we love oil, we will protect the oil fields. But like General Mazlum said, is that it is not really the case, that they are not just there to protect the oil fields. The photo is much larger than that, like it's bigger. Do you think it is only for oil that they've changed their decision to stay there?
No, I think that it has to do with the broader machinations of the American foreign policy establishment, in particular with respect to checking Iranian interests, that there's it's significant to have some kind of military presence, particularly in the south of the country with respect to blocking any kind of attempt, but also have some sort of presence and continuing alliance with the Kurdish movement with respect to the so-called counter-terrorist operations against ISIS. So the fact that there is such a potential for a resurgence of ISIS, I think, is something that the American foreign policy establishment pays attention to as well.
For example, OPCW is about using white phosphorus against civilian, and they said it's not against chemical weapons convention. So these all are, it looks like no one is really going to do anything about these war crimes. So what do you think, why they are not doing anything?
I think that with respect to the illegal invasion, the international institutions have been very, very weakened in terms of their legitimacy, going back to the illegal invasion of Iraq, and so the war crimes committed by well, in this country, in the United Kingdom, the leaders of this country, the war crimes committed by the United States, going unpunished. I think that there's a general sense in which if the war crimes of the powerful don't get punished, and Turkey's a powerful enough actor on the global stage, and and is managing to negotiate both its continued allegiance to NATO and this aligned relation also with Russia. You have two major actors that are unwilling to push forward with respect to holding Turkey accountable. That's power politics. So when it comes to the questions of war crimes, if you can be accused of and held accountable for war crimes if you're not very powerful, but the more powerful you are, the more unaccountable you remain. I mean, go back to what unleashed so much of the chaos in the region, the illegal invasion and the war crimes that were committed in the invasion of Iraq.
So lastly, how do you read the near future of Syria among all these chaos and all these international power being in the same circle at the moment?
Yeah, I think that this is, so if I say that Russia obviously gained a lot in terms of consolidating its presence as a power broker with Trump's decision, so too obviously Assad is greatly strengthened by this, because it was widely believed that he had ceded that territory pretty much indefinitely, de facto, to the control of the Kurdish forces, and now it's not clear what's going to happen, because you have the Kurdish movement forced to allow the Russians and the Syrian forces to come in and patrol. It's not clear what that's going to entail in terms of the future of the autonomy of the Kurdish project, but it certainly means, is a great victory for Assad.
Yeah. Do you think that Rojava revolution is in danger?
Certainly, the future of the autonomy of the revolutionary forces is greatly endangered by both the genocidal attack against it of the Turkish forces, which also leads to a resurgence of ISIS and the jihadis, but also the presence of the Assad forces patrolling the streets. So it's, in many respects, it's at a very critical juncture, both in terms of just the lives and how many 300,000 people have been displaced already. So it's a great escalation with respect to the living, the conditions for life in the region, but it is also a great danger with respect to the potential for the autonomous institutions to be undermined.
Dr. Thomas Jeffery Miley, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.